welcome. You're watching the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. When do you know price rise is a real crisis? When do alarm bells start ringing? We've been talking about the humble tomato disappearing from kitchen for several days. The situation has now become so dire that even McDonald's has had to take tomatoes off their menu. Yes, you heard it right. At least 2 outlets in Delhi of McDonald's have notices that say tomatoes will be kept out of their burgers and wraps as quality and quantity standards can't be met. So, how bad is it really? Today I have a very special guest in the studio, and this is a guest you all are familiar with, has been giving a lot of people tears. I'm talking about the humble tomato. And this is our special guest of honor because it has become so difficult to include this in an everyday diet that even a massive chain like McDonald's has had to make cuts. So how much did this cost? We decided to order tomatoes online to our office today to figure out what the prices really are. The price of this half kilogram of tomato is 75 rupees. That is, it's retailing at 150 rupees per kg. And frankly, it's not the best quality, but we have to make do. Prices have gone up 300% in the last 10 days. I'm going to give this pile of tomatoes a special place at my table today. Prices have gone up 300% in the last 10 days. Little wonder then that the humble tomato is disappearing, not just from burgers and wraps at McDonald's, I'm sure from kitchens as well. So what are the reasons? Will we see other restaurants follow? What should you do? How long will this last? What's the economic impact? We're going to give you every angle on the story this evening. Let me begin by introducing our panelists today. Zoravar, MD of Massive Restaurants, is with me on the show. I'm speaking with Pradeep Shetty, President, Hotel and Restaurant Association. Indranil, Chief Economist, Yes Bank, is with me. And I'm also going to be speaking with Chef Harsh Kedia. Well, the chef is also here because we need to figure out what to do when we can't include tomatoes in our recipes anymore. How do we deal with that? Let me go to Zoravar Kalra first. Zoravar, we've had now some clarity from the two groups which run McDonald's in different parts of the country. The ones in Western and South say that we have tomatoes. Only 10–15% of our outlets are cutting back. There is a situation in the northern parts of this country, but it's just showing you that when there is QSR on such a big scale, finding it difficult to get quality produce, that we're looking at a real crisis. What has been your experience? Zoravar, can you hear me?
Yeah, I lost the last bit. Sorry. Can you repeat the last bit?
What has been your experience, Zoravar? Are you cutting back on your chutneys and curries and looking for alternatives, or are menu prices going up?
Yeah. So it'll be a little hard for me to make makhani gravy without tomato, right?
Yes.
So I think, firstly, anytime prices go up, the already small, thin margins that the restaurant industry operates on get further constrained, right? Food costs jump up, especially for North Indian chain restaurants that use a lot of tomato in their cooking. The fact is that this happens actually every year, and we actually plan this into our purchase agreements. We usually have annual agreements with our vendors, but literally as of 2 days ago, I had to sign an amendment to one of the agreements with some of our suppliers where the vegetable guys were just hurting. They were hurting really bad, and we had to make amendments to our annual contracts and grant them an increase in the pricing, because failing that, they would have been unable to supply to us at all and would have probably gone under. And these are long-term standing vendor relationships. So yes, it's a big problem. It's a challenge. I'm in Bengaluru at the moment, and I was eating at one of my favorite restaurants, which is a South Indian QSR called Rameshwaram. And it's a fantastic restaurant. I was sitting with the owner, my friend Nagaraj, and he ordered me what is my favorite dish, which is a tomato bhat. It's like a tomato sabzi kind of a thing. And literally, the generous guy that he is, he served me the smallest portion. And I looked at it and started laughing and said, is this actually hurting you too? You're one of the most successful restaurants in the southern part of this country, and you're actually you're doing conjuice stuff. You're being thrifty with me. But we laughed about it. The fact of the matter is, it is not possible for most restaurants to be able to pass on this increased price to the consumer. Yeah. We'll have to absorb it. it is something that we have to deal with. It's part of doing business. It happens every year.
No,
This year
so
it's been
1 minute. A quick follow-up, Zoravar. You're saying it happens every year, and we know that there are shortages every year. There are a few days in June, July when tomatoes do make it, I wouldn't say to the top headlines in the front pages, but they do make it to the news. This time is special. That's why I have this bag of tomatoes with me in the studio. This time this has special place of honor because of the zoom in prices and how long it's been going on. And there are a number of reasons for that. I'll come to Indranil in just a minute for those reasons. So how is it different this time round? Are you finding it even more difficult? And not just price and quantity. We also have to talk about quality.
What really dictates for a premium dining company like ours is the quality, and we won't let that fall down. And that's why we agreed to an increase in prices on our pre-signed annual contracts. So technically, the vendor has to supply to us, but if he's going to be unable to do so, he will compromise on the quality. So most restaurants like ours that serve a premium, serve at that premium price and are serving a discerning customer, it's not going to be possible. You've seen what happens with QSRs. They sell burgers at 50 rupees and sometimes $100 and low prices. So even a 300% increase in an item that is 15% of their cost, it actually adds up adding 45% to the food cost of that burger. So I can totally understand why they would stop. In our case, we're going to have to, suck it up. We're going to have to deal with it. We're going to have to absorb the impact. We will not be able to increase the prices of any of our dishes. And we don't do that at any time in any case, because I think that kind of is a short-term knee-jerk reaction. It's important to think long-term. I'm sure this will pass. Yes, it's extremely critical right now because, it is a crazy burgeoning price. But at the same time, something that we all kind of have to absorb and deal with. I don't think increasing prices for CDRs, which are casual dining chains or fine dining chains, is going to be steeped in reality. But at the same time, quality is number one priority. If you support your vendor right now, he will ensure that the quality that he supplies to you will be the same as before, and you'll end up being able to serve your customer in a consistent manner.
We're talking about vendors, but households are also being hit. We don't even know how this is going to impact inflation numbers. Let me come to Indranil and what this entire tomato story is telling us, Indranil, about how vulnerable we are to these inflationary spikes. How vulnerable our supply chain management is on perishables and the impact it's going to have.
Okay, so if I look at the previous month data, tomato prices are definitely up by around 65 or 66%. Now, obviously, that will have its implication in terms of the retail inflation that we calculate for June. But having said that, it's a bit of a dart throwing at this point in time for economists like me, because even in the last sort of month, the vegetable prices that we finally saw being accounted for in the retail inflation numbers that came out was almost half the actual increase that had happened for me. Now, in the current month, we had, or rather for June, we had almost a 15% increase in the overall vegetable prices, which of course includes the tomato, which has been the highest increase of about 65, 66%. And to a certain extent, if we sort of still pass on about 50% to the retail customer, our estimate for inflation is about 4.7% at this point in time. Now, if the pass-through is relatively higher than it was in May, obviously the inflation number goes up. But as your previous guest says, this is an event that we see every June and July. This year was slightly more aggressive in terms of the event playing out because of the extreme weather conditions. Once you have large heat waves across the country, then you had unseasonal rains, and finally you had virus affecting crops in Karnataka. So that's the reason why tomato prices have been on the boil, and much more significantly than in the previous years. Yes, it will take time to cool down, but definitely there's a seasonal effect that plays through on the tomato side.
Okay, so there is a seasonal effect. There is, of course, these two viruses which have impacted the crops, and we've been giving you all of those details on our screen as well. I'm also welcoming Pradeep Shetty on the show right now, who is joining us to give us more perspective of how businesses are dealing with this. Mr. Shetty, are we seeing possibly prices going up in mid-level restaurants? chefs or management trying to cut down on the use of tomatoes in their recipes? How are you dealing with this tomato crisis? If the mighty McDonald's can't deal with it, how are other restaurants dealing with it?
So hi. So first of all, this is a very regular feature for the food and beverage industry and also for the hotel in the country, because this happens. It's very cyclic in nature, and this happens every year. In fact, twice a year. This has been happening for the last decade or so. Second part is that what a McDonald done is not fantastic, because for McDonald the use of tomato is very limited, probably a slice of it between the burger buns. But otherwise, for a large part of Indian restaurants, it is of critical importance to maintain a tomato. So what we are doing, and which large part of restaurants are doing, that cutting the use of it, which is only curbing it. You can't completely eradicate it. So the bottom line is the business operator or the restaurant, the hotelier bears the brunt of this. It is not passed on to the consumer. There are a lot of measures that the production team takes on how to use alternatives or reduce the use of it, so that you can mitigate the inflationary cost which hits the bottom line. So such measures are done. We use it less. The production team is given a target to keep it at a particular level. If it earlier was X, you bring it to X minus 20%. That's how it's been dealt with. But all in all, it looks like a temporary phase which will phase out. And in case this stays longer than about 3 to 4 weeks, then probably measures like increase of prices will come in, which means it will be translated into the consumers.
Okay, it's already been going on for at least 2 weeks. It's already been going on for at least 2 weeks. There has been no relief yet. You have state governments who are giving subsidized tomatoes at their fair price shops. So that's the state it's come to. Let me come to Chef Harsh Kedia. And, this was an interesting idea that came about. So the reason we have a chef here is, what do you do if you want to cut down on the amount of tomatoes in your kitchen and save your budget?
That's very funny.
Before I come to you, Harsh, when I was just looking at this, tomatoes are not originally part of the Indian diet, so to speak. They came into India via the Portuguese in the 19th century from South America. Does that mean we're going to have to remember all those ancient recipes without tomatoes now?
If I may, there was a very funny sort of incident that happened. I was traveling back from Pune to Bombay. I'd gone to my factory, and my mom just called me up and she said that Pune mein tomatoes are available for 60 rupees a kg, and the bhajiwala here is giving it 160. So load up 7 kgs of tomatoes in your car and bring it back. I had a hearty laugh, but then I started imagining the plight of Indian households and mothers who do sort of function, especially in vegetarian settings where a lot of gravies are pertaining to tomatoes, especially in Gujarati, Marwadi households. And like mentioned by Zoravar sir earlier, a lot of North Indian households use tomatoes as a base for gravy. However, I feel on a chef and someone who's grown up as a home chef perspective, I feel a lot of other substitutes are available, like onions, and there's cashews that can be used. Again, cashews come with a lot of privilege in a lot of households.
Yeah. I mean, if I can afford cashews, I can definitely afford tomatoes.
I'm giving you alternatives because currently, if I use a handful of cashews that I soak and I use, it's still going to be cheaper than buying a kilo of tomatoes and blanching it and then blending it and using it. Going back to onions, if I'm not wrong, a couple of years back, McDonald's had pulled out onions of the aloo tikki burger as well when the onion prices had gone up. So moving back to tomatoes, there's also tomato puree available. So my mother was just telling me to go to the market and buy pre-canned tomato puree that can be used in households. So not dissuading the use of fresh tomatoes, but while we're looking at that front, there's a lot of alternatives that we can use.
I can just imagine people watching this nodding their heads, especially people who run kitchens. Indian households do not like canned stuff versus fresh.
With you, I agree with you completely, but it's the need of the hour. And if you really want to push yourself and have heavy tomatoey gravies, you can do that. Alternatively, you can move to coconuts. Coconuts work really well for gravies. Like you can have desiccated coconuts, you can have coconut milk. A lot of South Indian food is cooked without tomatoes with a lot of coconutty gravies. Moving right up to Maharashtra, we use a lot of like garlic, we use a lot of like green chilies, we use coriander to create a lot of based curries. So I feel it's an extreme situation where people will like eradicate the use of tomatoes. But in the best case situation, you can start alternating it with packaged or canned tomato purees, and you can try alternative recipes. This is my perspective. Again, on a restaurant standpoint and perspective, I have worked with a couple of cafe chains and restaurants, and like mentioned earlier by the gentleman, it's very difficult to push up prices suddenly for like a short-lived inflation. For households, it's easier to sort of make that switch and be like, "Aaj butter chicken nahi banne wala ghar pe." You're not getting butter chicken. You're going to get chicken instead, or you're going to get like a coconutty gravy, or you can make something in paneer or tofu for that matter. So yeah, that's what I feel. And at home, I feel coming with some form of privilege, a lot of privilege rather, that I was able to carry back.
I'm getting a tough question for you, Harsh, since you are the chef on the panel and giving us alternatives. Tell us a non-tomato recipe of pav bhaji.
I think non-tomato recipe of pav bhaji, and as extreme as I can go, probably you can continue making it with your aloo, capsicum, you can use pyaz, you can use a lot of those things, and pav bhaji masala, along with, I'm going to throw it at you, tomato puree. Tomato puree would really do the job.
Okay.
Because on a very commercial level, I don't think a lot of our thelawalas and a lot of people at the beach selling pav bhaji use like the best grade, bestest form of tomatoes out there. So I'm sure there has to be like a midway of like making it and using it in a more viable mannerism. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. No, that was on a lighter note. That was on a lighter note, and I was trying to give you a tough one. I want to come to the serious part of it, because the reason why the tomato story is such an important one, not just because McDonald's is, as some people say, cheaping out on giving us tomatoes. Even the poor Bhelpuri wala is still giving tomatoes, hopefully. But because what it's telling us about how less we can depend on supply chains and how tougher it's going to get. Pradeep Shetty talked about how this is a problem seasonally twice in a year since the last decade. Now, Mr. Shetty, you've been in this business much, much longer than a decade. Have you been seeing how these seasonal issues are hitting ingredients? Because this is just an example of a bigger problem that we are facing.
So see, the larger part of the problem is how the government manages these fresh produce and all of that. And whenever we have interactions at the association level, these things are brought up. And I'm sure the government does its best. Nobody wants to deprive, any household or a business of a tomato. But in the sense to deal with such a problem on a yearly basis for a couple of weeks is not a problem at all. It can be handled. I mean, as I told you, it doesn't get transferred to the consumer. Not a difficulty. We stop giving freebies. In a lot of smaller restaurants, there are freebies like, extra onions, extra tomatoes. All those are stopped. So I think it's not really difficult to mitigate this problem. It is the problem. There is a larger issue of farm produce and how to control and how to regulate is something that is beyond our reach or purview or even comment for that matter. From our standpoint, only see how do we mitigate this without really burning our own pockets. But the fact of the matter is we do end up burning our pockets because mind well, we are in a service industry. We have to, at the end of the day, see that, my regular customer doesn't feel the pinch for a short inflationary period. And in doing so, we suffer ourselves and see to it that as far as possible, we don't hurt our consumers. I mean,
we're focusing a lot on just the tomato, but the fact is that other prices have gone up as well, from green chilies to spices. We've been covering it extensively on ET Now, and all of that adds up. Zoravar, your comment on that, beyond a point, holding on to prices will be important, isn't it? And I know that the sort of restaurants you have, maybe there is more flexibility, people will maybe pay more, but overall on the business, that's a huge impact.
it hurts our bottom line.
Oh,
it
okay.
does. But yeah, but I'll tell you, after the pandemic, there was a huge surge in general every product that was used in a restaurant or a hotel. But that over a period of last couple of months, that got rationalized. In the sense, of course, there was an increase. So we pushed our prices up by about, I think on an average, 15 to 25% is what the increase happened. Now, right now, other than farm produce, we don't see anything else really moving upward. That is more or less stabilized. Farm produce is a matter of concern, which in general sense is usually known to be temporary. I mean, this kind of 40, 50, 70% increase is known to be temporary. I'm sure government will bring in some measures to, rationalize it. As I said, if it goes beyond 4 weeks, then we are definitely going to, push our prices up.
Yeah, the question for Zoravar as well. Yes, Zoravar.
So I think you're absolutely correct. I think it's going to be a finite problem. It's a temporary blip on the radar, so to speak. What we have done with our vegetable vendors, and we're seeing this across a lot of categories, is we've given them exactly days. So we've increased the prices at our end with our suppliers to ensure that the quality is maintained and also to give support, right? The way we mitigate this is, and the way the vendor also mitigates is, there are also many times when the tomato price will fall way below what it was in the past 6-7 months. So they are able to average it out. This has been obviously a bigger change, a bigger gap. A 300% increase is nothing to balk at. It's a very serious issue. We are very hopeful, and so are our vendors, that in about another 2 to 3 weeks, this should get mitigated. Fact is, as Mr. Shetty also said before, in our industry, in the service industry, it's a lot about sacrifice. We run at thin margins, right? A typical restaurant functions around 15-20% margin, and the typical food cost is around 30%. So if the food cost jumps up by 10%, you basically lost half your entire margin, and you're left with basically nothing. So all that effort will be for naught. However, this happens to us. We're a hardy industry where there's a lot a lot of tough times that the industry has gone through. This, I feel, is short term. I'm not deeply concerned about it at the moment, but like everybody's been talking on this panel, if this continues to escalate and last for more than 4 or 5 weeks, then there might be some adjustments required. You might have to have temporary increases in prices. You might have to remove some items from the menu. But one thing will remain constant. The food industry really cares about its customers, and I'm sure none of us will allow poor quality to be served. It's better to not serve the dish than to serve a poor quality dish. So I think it's finite. I'm fairly sure this will pass.
That's important. Quality of the produce is also something we need to take care of as the prices continue to go up. Thank you to all of you for joining us on this special show this evening as we look at the farm to fork story of the humble tomato, which has really been giving a lot of people heartburn. We'll take a very short break, but stay tuned. A lot more coming up on the other side.